We've got an NP247 all torn apart. Got a whole bucket full of parts. We're going to have a video here where we put it back together. We're going to start out by showing how we cleaned out the viscous coupler. Okay, we're going to start the reassembly video. I went ahead and hung this viscous coupler over a plastic bucket. Went ahead and shot down in these clutch plates with some brake clean. Got my fingers in here, rotated those clutch plates. Went all the way around, did that. The idea is that this is where kind of that funky, stinky smell is coming from, these clutch plates, which are really just like transmission plates. So we'll kind of get those cleaned off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and soak this thing down in some regular automatic transmission fluid. Eventually, we'll drain all that transmission fluid out and we'll soak it in the actual expensive stuff, the NP247 Mopar fluid, and get this thing good and lubricated up with that before we put it back in the transmission or transfer case. The idea here is that perhaps we can flush a little bit out with the cheaper fluid here. It's got a pretty good seal there, so right now it's all going internally. Nothing is seeping around to the outside of my bucket, so all that's soaking in there pretty good. So we'll just do kind of a little flush treatment with this fluid, and then eventually, like I say, we'll get everything we can drained out, and then we'll soak it real good in the special Mopar fluid. Kind of work our way around and pour some in each of these openings so that it drizzles through the clutch plates in there. I'm getting a little bit of black stuff out the bottom. I know that in here there's a pump, so there's probably some pretty good cavities in here, but I looked inside and where the splines are. I really don't see any openings or holes where you'd think that oil would pump into this, but it has to, get in here somehow. So we'll just keep this up for now. I've flushed out that viscous coupler. Now I'm going to start working on the oil pump tube. All I really need is the screen off of this that I got at the dealership. The tube that's in that 247 is a pretty specialized part. All I really need is this screen to get plugged into here. So what I'm going to do is just carefully cut this plastic pipe, split it, and get this filter off of there. Then I can plug it into here. We should be ready to go. Now I've got it to the point that it comes out of there. So there's my new screen. Yeah, I paid $4 for a 2004 like half a penny O-ring that goes on the end of that. Have that viscous coupler kind of soaking in the regular ATF fluid. Let it sit there for quite a while and drain. Now we're going to go ahead and fill her up with the expensive stuff. Let her soak. Now I'm going to pour some of the good expensive stuff in there. I put a little bit in. One thing I noticed is this is not red at all. This stuff is just like motor oil. So we'll get some of that going around in there, move things around, flip it over, let it soak in there, a little saute action. Based on the fact that what I drained out of the transfer case was definitely red, and this Mopar fluid is not red, just like motor oil, I think it's safe to say that whoever owned that transmission case before did not put in the proper fluid. My gut feeling is this is probably just similar to a transmission fluid with some limited slip modifiers in it that helps work with those clutch plates, but everybody seems to agree got to use this stuff if you've got one of these viscous couplers or an NP247, 245, or 249. It's time to put this thing back together. I'm going to follow my step-by-step reinstallation procedure, which you can find in the comments section below. We're going to start by putting this front drive shaft bearing back in. If you watch the original video, this is the one that was slightly questionable. I bought a new transmission bearing. I bought a new bearing for the tail hub. This one felt the best of them all. And once I got it cleaned up and greased, it feels pretty good. And this is that one that is a special bearing, OEM part only, but bottom line, I think an NSK 6207 would work just fine. This one is a NSK 6207 with a little A. Supposedly something special about this that it costs 80 bucks. That's why we're going to go ahead and reuse this one. Go ahead and get a little bit of lube on your finger, run it around in here. We're going to press that bearing in. No snap ring on this one. We're going to press it in so that we can read the NSK 6207A from this side. Get it in there as straight as you can get it. What I'm going to use is a 2-inch rigid steel conduit coupling. That fits on there real nice. Use this block. We'll go ahead and we'll drive that in there till we feel it seat. We're driving on the outer race now, so we don't have to be quite as careful, but obviously you want to go in straight. Work it in the best you can. Just work around slowly. And there she goes. Now we're going to install this front drive shaft. You want to make sure that this little plastic gasket is on there. So go ahead and lube the seal, lube the shaft. Carefully feed this through the bearing and carefully through the seal. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a little oil or grease on these splines, and then we'll put the yoke on there, and then we'll take this 1 1/8 nut and we'll torque that to spec on here, which is basically impact tight. Going to want to have this all cleaned up. You're going to want to put a little lube here on this hub, right where the seal is going to rub. You don't want to damage that seal when this slides through there. It's got that little rubber thing on there, so sometimes this doesn't exactly line up the first time. But there it goes. Alright. Now we put the 1 1/8 nut on there. Get that nut started on there. Make sure you're not cross-threaded. And you're there. I didn't really notice it when I took the old front input transmission shaft bearing out. I just, removed that snap ring and thought it was something I had to do, but in reality there's no groove in here. It was just pounded in until that snap ring came down flush with the case. So for this one, I'm going to put just a little bit of grease in here. We'll get this on there nice and square. And then I've got a piece of pipe that straddles that outside race real good. put my plate on there and we'll tap that into place. We've got that greased. We're going to tap this front transmission shaft bearing in until the snap ring touches the case. Get this piece of pipe on there that spans it real nice. Get my block on there. And we'll tap her in. It's pretty crooked, so we'll straighten it out over here. Almost home. Sounds solid all the way around. That was a Timken 110L. About 50 bucks on Amazon. Next we're going to install the planetary gears. So I'm going to go ahead and lube up this outer ring with some of the special transfer case fluid. Get a little bit down there into that bearing. It'll drip all over the front on my cardboard, but that's okay. So let's get those planetary gears. Alright, got the planetary gears. There's a pocket bearing down in here. Been sitting for a couple days. We're going to get some of the debris out. We've got the planetary gears here. We never did take these apart. You could do that. There's a snap ring here. You could take these apart further, but I never went that far. They were pretty easy to clean up, so nothing much to see in there. Slide this in through that bearing. Now we'll turn this over and we'll install the snap ring to hold them in. It took just a little bit of wiggling and a little light tapping to get those to drop down in there to where you can see that gear here is flush with the top. So now we'll flip it over, put the snap ring on, hold those planetaries in. Before I put this in, I did squirt it down pretty good, a little more than I showed on camera, with the transfer case fluid. You want to have a good set of snap ring pliers. See if we can get this thing spread. Now we're going to install the main input shaft cover. We've got this surface and the cover surface extremely clean. Now we're going to go around and apply a light coating of ultra black gasket maker. We've got a light coating of the RTV silicone around here. Remember, you don't need much. I've heard some people say it's not like you're baking a cake. When I first took this apart, I took this big snap ring off that holds that outer planetary ring in. Didn't actually end up taking that out. I think you have to press that out somehow, like there might be some kind of a outer material that's holding that in, but I've never seen anybody take those out. But anyway, we're going to reinstall that big snap ring. We'll just get one edge in and then we'll kind of work our way around. And click. Alright, now we're going to install the main shaft here. I put some lube on all these splines and gears down in here in this little pilot bearing. We're going to install this along with the shift fork. So slide the shift fork into this groove here. And then work it on down in. Try and get the shift fork pin into the cam over there. That popped right in over there, so we're good. Now we're going to install this rod through the shift fork and down into the hole in the bottom. First we're going to make sure there's a little lube on the rod and down in the bottom there. And then the shift fork, sometimes you have to reach back here and kind of shift things a little bit. Takes a little effort to get that to line up. You wiggle just right and bang, it goes in there. I've never figured out why this thing sticks out so far into the other half of the clamshell. You would think there'd be a spring or a bushing out here. Nothing shows up on the diagrams that I see. Nothing was there to start with. All I can think of is that they just wanted to maintain using this same rod, so they just extended the shaft or the housing so that they could reuse this for multiple models. Now you're going to want to make sure that this little washer goes on here. It's going to ride down here. The needle pins are going to sit on top of that washer that we just put in there. So the next step is to put a little bit of grease around this shaft. We're going to put all those 47 needle pins around there. First we're going to tuck a towel in here, so in case those needle pins fall out on us, they don't fall into the planetary gears. Now you're going to want to install this towel just in case you drop some of those needle pins, they don't fall down in the planetaries. Install just a light coating of grease on this shaft. Again, that washer is on there first. Now basically just take these little needle pins one at a time, set them on top of that washer, work your way around. We've got all 47 of those in place. Now we're going to install this hub over the top of them. Check and make sure there's no gaps. All the pins are there, so you could remove this towel at that point. Go ahead and put a little oil in there. Now on top of these needle pins, there's a washer that drops down in there. When I took it off, I noticed that there's a kind of the shiny side went down toward the pins, so we'll slide that onto the shaft. And it drops right in there and fills in that hole. Now it's time to install the chain. When I took it off, I noticed the darker gear was on the main input shaft and the other one was on the back, so I don't think it matters, but we'll reinstall it the way it was. This may take just a little finagling because the chain is fairly tight, but that wasn't bad at all. Dropped right over there. I'm going to go ahead and install a little bit of lube on all these things. We'll lube this chain up quite a bit before we close the camshell. We'll rotate this around. We've got a couple of snap rings that go on and hold these gears down. One for the shaft that drives the front wheels and one for the main shaft. So we'll go ahead and get those installed. These snap rings are a bit of a fighter to get on. I'm sure if you had some that had little flat paddles it would be a lot easier, but keep fighting it, you'll eventually get it on there. And then work it down till it clicks. Make sure it's engaged all the way around. Do the same thing for the back one. If you can get in here with a screwdriver and move it, you know it's in the groove then. It's now time to install the mysterious Viscous Coupler, which we've had sauteing in the special transfer case fluid. I turned it on end and squirted some right down in those plates. It's going to go down with these teeth side down. So we'll go ahead and slip that on the main shaft. There are a couple of different levels of gears here, so it doesn't always just slip all the way on right away. I've had to play with these quite a bit sometimes. I'm acting like I'm a professional. Quite a bit sometimes. I've done it like twice when I took it apart. So yeah, I don't know, what the magic number is, but I just keep lifting it up, turning it, setting it back down. Maybe I'll take it back off, move the gears around inside of it, slide it back on. But once it goes in, you'll know it, and it'll be basically flush down here with this gear. I don't know what the secret is, but I just kept wiggling and trying, and finally, clunk, it goes down in place. It's time to put the oil pump on. This is the side that goes down. This is the side that goes up. Right here is where your pickup tube is going to plug in. We're going to flip this over. You can kind of see the internals of this a little bit. It's kind of like a big sprocket. So we're going to squirt some lube in there, kind of get this oiled up, and then we'll slide it on. Now there's a snap ring that goes on there, so we'll get that installed. The good news is this snap ring is the kind that we have the proper pliers for, so we can get that spread open. Drop it over the shaft. You want to make sure it doesn't fly off on you. Let me get a better grip on it here. Make sure that's in the groove. Kind of look in there and follow that groove around, and yep, it's in there. We're going to install the tail cone shaft or the rear wheel output shaft bearing. Bought a new one for this. They're commonly available at your local supply houses. This one is an SKF model 6206. It has after that NRJEM, but I think 6206 is the important part. That has a snap ring on it, and that snap ring goes toward the top. We're going to slide that bearing on the shaft with the groove toward the top. The snap ring that came with the new bearing, we don't need it because there's already that same snap ring inside the tail cone housing. Down inside the tail cone here is that ring that's going to pop into that bearing. It's a different style. It's not. It's got tabs on it. There is a standard snap ring that holds that rear bearing on. It's the kind that we have the proper pliers for, so makes it a lot easier. Again, you're going to kind of want to cup it so that if it flies off, it doesn't go behind the shelf and get lost. Get that snapped in. Okay, heard it click. Check all the way around. Want to make sure you install the magnet. It doesn't stick to this case because this is non-ferrous, so magnet goes in that little slot. We're to the part where we're going to install the new oil pump pickup screen, which slides into this slot right here. And then this tube plugs into it. Kind of like that. Goes through the front cover here. So we're going to get this installed on there. See if this is all going to stick in place while we set that cover down on the other half of the clamshell. It's a little bit of a puzzle to get all these parts to fit together. This has a little ridge on it that has to go on the other side of the cover first. So then you kind of need to get the filter pulled out a little bit, get this tube kind of started in there, and then as you push the screen in, that tube will slide all the way into the hose. And at that point, everything is held in place. Again, there's a little ridge on this side that's holding that in. So that does hold it in while you put the two halves together. We're to the point now where we're just about ready to slip this other half of the cover onto here. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and lube everything up with the special fluid. The chain, anything we can find here. Squirt some in the oil pump, lube the bearing. There's a little pocket bearing down here in the cover. The other half of the case, get some in there. Get that all ready. Then we're going to very carefully clean this surface and the surface of the other half. And then we're going to put a light bead of black silicone all the way around. Not going crazy. Again, you're not decorating a cake. Thin coating, and then we'll just smear it around and get a nice coverage, and then we'll put the two halves together, put the bolts on, and we'll be ready to roll. I've got an hour and about 20-minute video where I tear this thing completely apart. I go through a lot of detail. I show you different stuff like right now we're in low gear. Shift into neutral. The planetaries down here are not spinning. In low gear they were spinning. I had to turn this several times to get the planetaries to go around once. Then when I shift it into high, the planetaries down below here are moving at the same speed as the shaft I'm turning here. Just wanted to show you on this oil pump, this is where the tube will plug in. So that'll have to be oriented in a certain way. And then this is the tail cone. One little tidbit there, this tail cone does have a bushing up inside of it that you can replace if you want to. It's about right in here. But I wanted to show you that eventually this is going to go on here like this. This rod's going to slide into this hole. This oil pump has a piece sticking out here, basically a notch that's going to fit into, let's see, it would be this slot right here. So this slot is going to accept this part of the oil pump, and that'll keep it from turning. It's time to do a final cleaning of this surface. We're going to put a thin bead of silicone around here. My favorite for that is acetone. You can get fingernail polish that's 100% acetone, or you can get this at Walmart or anywhere. But this acetone really gets all the oils off of this surface. So get that good and clean, and then we'll put a little bead of black silicone around there. These two halves come together. This is a highly machined surface, so you really don't need very much silicone. So, you know, you're not decorating a cake here. Just a thin bead all the way around, and then we'll go ahead and swirl it and get it to cover. But this is less than 1/8 of an inch bead that I'm putting on here. I've got a thin bead all the way around. Now I'm going to use my finger to just kind of even that out a little bit. Just get a nice even coating. You got to remember, when you clamp this together, tighten it up with the bolts. Whatever squeezes out on the outside is also squeezing out on the inside. You don't want to have a whole bunch of chunks of silicone breaking loose on the inside. I've got the other half of the clamshell all cleaned off with acetone. I've lubed up this pilot bushing. We've got the oil pump screen and the tube in place here, so we can flip it over and put it in place. I'm just really not happy with the way that screen kind of falls out of there. To hold that filter in, I cut this off of like a Bic pen, the part that holds it in your pocket. I'm going to put some silicone on it, and I'm going to slide it in here and wedge that in place. It's time to put this other half on. I've wedged that screen into place by shoving a little piece of a Bic pen, like the part that holds it into your pocket, down in there, siliconed it in place. So now that's nice and tight. I've lubed up this little pocket bearing. I've cleaned the surfaces with acetone, and now we're ready to drop it on there. There are these alignment pins that I think it's hung up on right now. So I'm going to just give it a little tap with a dead blow hammer. Alright, we're going to install the bolts that hold the two halves together. The long bolts are 12-point 10mm. Then we've got two that are slightly longer, and they go there where the alignment pins were. And then the shorter 15mm bolt on the right, several of those go everywhere else. The three 12-point ones seem to be randomly located on top. I'm not sure why. I'll probably apply just a dab of blue Loctite. You want to get all these bolts good and clean before you put them back in. I went through a lot of trouble cleaning all the threads, that kind of stuff. Again, the two longer bolts with washers go here where you've got the pry points. The shorter bolts that didn't have washers pretty much go around the bottom. Then up top there was the three 12-point bolts and then one 15mm. Got them all good and started by hand. Just barely snug them down. I've got all the bolts barely snugged down. I'm going to sneak on this oil pump tube. If you kind of get it at an angle and then rotate it, you can get this hose to pop on there. Now that's not going to go anywhere. When I took this apart, since that screen was missing, it looked like this might have actually popped out at some point, but the way it is now, it's in there good and snug. I know the screen's in place. We're in good shape. Now we're going to go around kind of in a cross pattern, snug these bolts up. I'm not going to tell you what the torque spec is. I don't know, but just good and tight without going crazy. As I tighten the bolts, I can see the silicone start to squeeze out. Just got a small bead all the way around. That's all you need. It's time to install the tail cone section. So we're going to again clean these, a little acetone, clean this surface with acetone. We'll apply the thin bead of black gasket material, silicone, to this surface. Smooth it out. We'll slip this down there. The only hard part is you got to get inside this little hole here, spread that snap ring apart. You can see that snap ring down in there. You have to spread that snap ring apart, and that snap ring drops into this groove in this front bearing. Easier said than done. Thin bead all the way around. Then we'll smooth it by hand and attempt to snap that tail cone on. If you look where the mating surfaces are here, you don't have to go crazy in this area. Just kind of go around that rod and around the oil pump tube. We're about ready to take a crack at installing this tail housing on here. The only hitch, like I said before, getting that little snap ring to pop into that bearing groove. Got to get something in there to spread it. We'll probably have to lay this thing down so we can come at it from the top, but we'll just see if we happen to get lucky and it slides over there or something. I've already lubricated the seal. Doesn't really matter at this point. Lubricated that bushing that's down inside there as well. That comes into play later when you put the shaft on. Again, here's this slot in the tail housing. It's going to line up with this fin on the oil pump to hold it in place. Could it be that easy? I'll have to look in the hole and see what we got. Nah, it's not that easy. It did pop on there, so I'm going to go ahead and put those 4 bolts in, just snug them down. Then I'll have to lay this thing down, reach inside there and try and spread that snap ring and pop it into that bearing. We've got the 4 13mm bolts. I'm just going to snug them down. Who knows, we may have to pull this back off to get that snap ring on, but at this point we'll just snug them. That'll hold it in place as we fiddle with that snap ring. We'll torque those down later. I wish I could show you how I did it, but there's not even room for one person down in there, let alone trying to hold a camera. But I used these snap ring pliers, was able to get them down in there, get them turned straight up. Then I was able to spread that snap ring. Then I was able to stick a screwdriver in between the snap ring pliers and move that bearing forward. Got it over the top. Gave that bearing a little bit of a shove and click. I could see that clip come, or that snap ring come together. And we've got it. Yep, everything's moving in there. Looks good. Alright, there's a little rubber plug that you put in here, so we'll go ahead and do that. get these 4 bolts tightened down, and we're done. I really have no idea how anybody could do this operation in a car when you've got the body of the car right here. I did see a video where a guy bent some snap ring pliers so he could get in there and go like that. But still, I mean, you'd have to have a mirror in there. I don't know how you get your screwdriver up in there to move that bearing. Boy, that'd be a real bear. Go ahead and put the little rubber plug in there. Alright, we'll tighten these 4 13mm bolts nice and snug in a cross pattern, and we'll be done. It's done! The step-by-step checklist really helps out. If you were trying to get that snap ring down inside the tail cone housing, up inside the vehicle, I've seen videos where they make themselves a little jig that they can spread that snap ring with, slide the tail cone on there. Then you're going to need to get a mirror or something. Make sure that you've got that snap ring lined up with the groove in the bearing, and then pull your string and spring your mousetrap. Might be a good idea to get one of those little cheap cameras at like Harbor Freight where you could get up in there and see what was going on. Would work a lot better than a mirror.